Grace navigates the emotional aftermath of her mother's betrayal. Despite cutting ties, Evelyn tries to mend the relationship, showing up uninvited at Grace's apartment and leaving tearful voicemails. Grace is resolute in her decision, but struggles with Emma's questions about why they no longer see her grandmother. Meanwhile, Evelyn and Michael's relationship begins to show cracks. Michael feels isolated, as most of his friends have sided with Grace. Evelyn grows possessive, fearing Michael will leave her now that their secret is out. Grace throws herself into her new blog, which she names From the Ashes. She begins sharing her story anonymously, connecting with women around the world who've experienced similar betrayals. Grace receives an anonymous email that reads, "Your mother's betrayal goes deeper than you think." Grace dismisses the email as a cruel joke, but can't shake the feeling that there's more to the story. She starts digging into her mother's past, recalling moments from her childhood that now feel suspicious, her mother's over-involvement in her relationships, her tendency to undermine Grace's self-confidence. Meanwhile, Evelyn grows increasingly paranoid about Grace's silence, suspecting that she's planning something. She pressures Michael to talk to Grace and find out what she's up to. Michael reluctantly agrees, but is rebuffed when Grace refuses to meet him. Grace's investigation leads her to an old family friend, Aunt Clara, who hints that Evelyn has a history of manipulating those around her, especially men. Clara cryptically says, "This isn't the first time she's crossed the line, Grace. You were just too young to see it." Grace receives a package containing an old, yellowed letter addressed to her father, who passed away when she was a teenager. The letter, written by Evelyn, reveals that she had been unfaithful during her marriage. The details are vague, but it suggests that Grace's father had considered leaving Evelyn before his sudden death. This revelation shatters Grace's image of her mother as the strong, supportive figure she once believed her to be. She confronts Evelyn with the letter, demanding answers. Evelyn becomes defensive, claiming it was thus a mistake and insisting that it has nothing to do with her relationship with Michael. Michael, overhearing the confrontation, begins to question Evelyn's version of events. The seeds of distrust are planted in their fragile relationship. Grace reconnects with her coworker, Daniel, who has been a quiet but supportive presence in her life. Daniel shares his own story of betrayal, and their bond deepens. He encourages Grace to continue seeking the truth, even if it's painful. Evelyn, feeling the strain of her unraveling life, starts drinking heavily. One night, during a heated argument, she accuses Michael of still being in love with Grace. Michael denies it, but his hesitation is telling. Meanwhile, Grace's blog gains popularity, attracting media attention. She is invited to speak at a women's empowerment conference. At the event, she meets a journalist who offers to help her investigate Evelyn's past. The episode ends with a startling discovery: Evelyn had a brief affair with a man who later became one of Grace's teenage boyfriends. Grace confronts Evelyn about her manipulative patterns, accusing her of sabotaging her relationships for years. Evelyn breaks down, revealing a tragic backstory: her own mother abandoned her, leaving her desperate for control and affection. While this confession garners some sympathy, Grace refuses to let it excuse Evelyn's actions. She wants Evelyn to stay out of her life, vowing to protect Emma from her toxic influence. Michael, meanwhile, begins to spiral. His guilt over betraying Grace clashes with his resentment toward Evelyn, who he now sees as the architect of their situation. Evelyn, sensing she's losing control over him, grows increasingly erratic. Evelyn attempts to win Grace back by threatening to expose a family secret if Grace doesn't forgive her. Evelyn's threat forces Grace to dig deeper. With the help of the journalist, she uncovers the truth. Her father's death wasn't the accident everyone believed it to be. There's evidence suggesting that Evelyn may have been involved, either directly or indirectly, in the events leading up to his fatal car crash. Grace is devastated, but resolves to confront Evelyn once and for all. Meanwhile, Michael, now completely disillusioned, begins reaching out to Grace to make amends. The episode ends with a dramatic confrontation at a family gathering, where Grace exposes Evelyn's manipulations in front of everyone. Evelyn denies the accusations, but the cracks in her facade are evident. Evelyn's life falls apart as friends and family distance themselves from her. She tries to manipulate Michael into staying, but he leaves her, realizing he's been a pawn in her games. Grace, empowered by the truth, decides to go public with her story, naming Evelyn in her blog. The post goes viral, sparking conversations about toxic family dynamics and betrayal. Emma begins asking more questions about her grandmother, forcing Grace to carefully explain the situation in a way that protects Emma's innocence. Grace is standing on the balcony of her apartment, looking out at the city lights. She receives an email from a publisher interested in turning her blog into a book. For the first time in years, she feels truly free. Grace begins writing her memoir, turning her pain into a source of strength for others. She starts dating Daniel, whose steady presence has been a source of comfort and inspiration. Evelyn, now alone and bitter, attempts to reconnect with Grace, but Grace firmly shuts the door on their relationship. The audience is left wondering if Evelyn will finally face the consequences of her actions, or if she'll find a way to manipulate her way back into Grace's life. Grace and Emma, laughing together, their bond stronger than ever. Grace says, "Life isn't about the betrayals that break us, but the strength we find to rebuild. And I'm stronger than I ever imagined." Watch out for Season 3.